So good morning, everybody. Looking at part two of Bradford, looking from the city centre, going round to Little Germany this time. So part of the route. Picking up where I finished off last time is really where Manor Row nearly meets Cheapside, as you can see the road coming down here. On Monday, we finished looking at the Forster Square station and the arches which run down here and the Midland Hotel down here. So I'm coming back up to here after that sort of detour around there and coming along Piccadilly and then down Darley Street once the main shopping street of Bradford, or one of the main shopping streets of Bradford, are now almost totally derelict. So let's set off on Duke Street. This is part of it. It's got this notable needle on it. That was created, called the threaded needle, by Rick Faulkner and put there in the year 2000. Obviously, it's got two connections, obviously, with the textile industry, but he also liked the analogy that the needle was and the thread was the connection from the railway station through into the city centre. By the side of it here, we see Manor Row and Duke Street buildings here. These are by architects War and Issett of Leeds. The taller one here is the Bradford Literary Library and Literary Institute, because they bought the building in 1854. And you can see, just raised it probably by a floor and a half to the size that it is today. And that was done in 1905. So let's move forward along this street. And you also had to see where it's now called Piccadilly, which I mentioned on Monday, and not Piccadilly around here. But really, the area that we're in was the sort of first warehouse district of Bradford before Little Germany was built. The sort of first warehouses were built here in 1833. Because they were sort of wool warehouses, sometimes for the storage of wool that was imported, but quite often for finished goods that were going to be exported as well. If we come down this street here, which comes out towards the bottom of where we're going to come around in I guess a few minutes, is there's one quite unusual building down here. Like I say, it's coming down here at the bottom down here. We're going to come almost down there. That's Kirkgate that crosses the bottom there. We're coming to a building there a little later on, but there's a building just down here, which is the History and Scientific Institute, built in 1871. The Latin inscription around there, I won't read it in Latin because I'll probably get it wrong. It says, "Write about what is known, the written words survive." So that's on the plaque above the door. I think at one time it was a pub, and it was closed. But when I was there last Saturday, the building's quite boarded up at the moment, but it has been sold to an investor. So hopefully that will be renovated, that building, and put back into use. So, but coming back up to the top of the street again, because this is where the warehouses are, which you can still see around here. Some of these are called, this one's called Equity Chambers, and the one across the road was built in 1904. Because it wasn't originally called Piccadilly, it was actually called Exchange Street, but they took on the name of the upmarket London Street for this area around here. Obviously the cafe there having a pun on the name. So just it's only a short bit of street, that is, and we can turn left onto Darley Street, because once one of the main shopping streets of Bradford. I showed you last time a picture taken on a Saturday afternoon in 2018, which showed about 3 people on the street. Well, I lamented then that there was probably only 2 shops down Darley Street. I'd probably say there's even less shops down Darley Street now. Boots, as we see here, as closed here. They've moved down into Bradford Broadway. Even one of the mobile phone shops has shut up shop. I think that was one of the shops that was open, and that's completely gone. This was the Marks and Spencer building. They moved down into Bradford Broadway as well. The only shop I can see down here when I was down there last Saturday, well, I wouldn't say it was technically a shop. I think it's might be backed by a church or something, but you can go in there and pick free books up. But they tend to be cast off from, I guess, a lot of charity shops as well. So they are largely sort of uninteresting books in there. So that's really the only one that is taking place. And that's where it's taken a big battering down here to this Kirkgate shopping centre here, because there's very few tenants in there as well. Have all sort of left or closed down. The former Marks and Spencer building here, which has got this sort of boarding in front of it, they say they're going to create that into a market. They're going to close the Osler market at the top that I looked at, demolish that, probably build unwanted office blocks or more shops on it, who knows, and they move the market down here so it's more central rather than being right at the top of the road. So I'm going to come down here and just finish on this piece of film just at where Kirkgate crosses the bottom, and you can really see this sort of unloved part of Bradford. So now I'm going to set off back from where I really set off from right at the beginning of part one, just near the City Hall here, where the National and Provincial Building Society building was. That's that red brick one by Waterhouse in a corporate style that you can see elsewhere. Then coming on to the bottom of Ivegate. Before last time I came up Ivegate, then onto Market Street, another principal shopping street of Bradford, which have brown muffs on and all sorts of other buildings. Then coming up Bank Street, coming to meet where Darley Street comes down, then turning onto Kirkgate, and then coming down Peace Hall Yard, and then into the Wool Exchange, the, I can say, most extravagant one of the most extravagant buildings in Bradford. It's I think it's one of the best buildings in Yorkshire. It's in a Venetian style, so we can look inside of that on the piece of film as well. So that's the next section I'm going to take, setting off really by the Ivegate Arch. I was asked what Ivegate means, so I've had a bit of a rummage around, and all I can see that it's the road or the street to St Ives, and being a sort of a Celtic saint at that time. I can say it's one of the earliest street in Bradford. There are really three of them that met. Ivegate coming up here, a bit further up there, Kirkgate, and then turns into Westgate. Perhaps it was out at Bingley, there's St Ives as well, so perhaps there's some sort of connection further down the Aire Valley going down there, and maybe that's how it got its name. You can't actually see this arch at the moment because the chemist here has a huge tent which covers the whole of this area, and this seems to have a lot of boarding and other stuff behind it, and even see on the bit of film there's bins behind it as well. This was placed here in 1988, and these images represent elements of Bradford's past. So you can see in here, I think there's some chimneys there. There seems to be a man on a horse there, but perhaps that represents the Civil War. We've got the brass band, because quite often the Yorkshire Brass Band contest takes place in St George's Hall. We've got trams here and other things there. So that's what makes up those panels onto there. So that's looking up Ivegate. Turning around now to hit Market Street, and this is sort of one of the views down it, including the Wool Exchange to the left-hand side. Could say that a lot of demolition took place along here in the 1960s. Particularly the greatest one lost was Swan Arcade, which stood in this area around there, and could say that was demolished in 1962. It was 4 interlinked arcades, and could say I think probably one of the greatest losses, and could say replaced with this concrete and steel structure. The other road behind that, could say, that was full of Victorian shops. That was demolished in the same period, and then a new shopping centre laid out then. That largely became redundant and was knocked down, I think, in 2007, 2008, maybe a year before that. And that was to make way for the shopping centre that was built Broadway later on. But I say that only lasted sort of 30 years or so, because it really didn't work. It didn't really prove attractive to shoppers, and because even then shopping habits were changing. So this is the Wool Exchange that we're going to look at here. This is this fine sort of Venetian Gothic style, and this was designed by Mawson and Lockwood as well. I think it's one of their finest buildings. It's unusually is that the main entrance where the tower is to the north of the building, so it sort of faces away from the city centre, which is a bit of a surprise. It also makes it quite hard to photograph as well, and so we see that there's portraits to both sides of this building here. The one along the Market Street, we see, you can see that some of the heads along here. We've got Richard Cobden, the Corn Law repealer. We've got an image of Titus Salt, obviously for Saltaire. Robert Stevenson, he's there for the railways, because obviously 2 railway stations are in Bradford. Richard Arkwright, the spinning machine that probably sort of gave Bradford its industry there. Another innovator from Bradford, Samuel Cunliffe Lister, because the man who built Manningham Mills and gave Lister Park to the town. He's the chap who then became Lord Masham and lived out there at Swinton Hall. And then we've also got Lord William Gladstone, former Prime Minister, and I guess his adversary, Lord Palmerston as well. He gets his head on there, largely because he laid the foundation stone for the Wool Exchange, and indeed when it was completed in, I think, 1868, is that he came and officially opened it as well. So if we look on this side of the building, we've got some different types of people on here. These all tend to be explorers. So the one who's pictured there, that's Christopher Columbus. We've also got Francis Drake, the navigator who went around the world in the Golden Hind. The adventurer Sir Walter Raleigh, who lost his head under Queen Elizabeth. George Anson, who was Lord of the Admiralty. And James Cook, the explorer. So we're going to go into the Wool Exchange a little later on, but we through the main entrance hall, through Waterstones as it is today. So we're going to continue up Bank Street. I guess if this just next to this picture, this is where the Wool Exchange is. So this was the Bradford and Bradford Commercial Bank. This was designed by Andrews and Pepper, built in 1868. There seems to be quite a lot of double acts in Bradford who are architects. So we've got obviously Lockwood and Mawson. Here we have Andrews and Pepper. And there's another pair called Milnes and France as well. We'll see a couple of their buildings, but weren't as notable for their architecture in Bradford. Perhaps there's too much competition in here at the time, but they're all sort of rivals together here. So we've learnt about Lockwood and Mawson. So let's hear a bit about Andrews and Pepper. William Andrews was born in 1804 in Howden and then moved to Bradford in 1832. He was initially in partnership with Frederick Delaunay. I think I've mentioned him before because they built a couple of those, but was succeeded by William's own son. So this is Thomas Andrews. He was born in 1838 in Bradford. When his father died in 1870, Thomas, his son, went into partnership with Joseph Pepper. Thomas Andrews died in 1886, and they had an assistant called James Leddingham. That's a chap who I've mentioned before. And most of his buildings are up in the sort of the Northgate area, and were responsible for building most of the fine properties out at Manningham. He left in 1880 from that partnership to strike out on his own after 10 years with Andrews and Pepper. And Andrews and Pepper, probably the largest contract they had was the building of Manningham Mills. That's huge mills that is on the skyline there, built by Mr. Lister up there, Samuel Cunliffe Lister. So that's what we can see there. So that's on the corner of Bank Street and adjacent to the Wool Exchange. Then coming up Bank Street, we've got quite a large block, which you'll see on the film here. And this was for the Bradford Liberal Club. That's why it's got the initials LC up there, built in 1876. This was designed by Lockwood and Mawson on that side of the street. So that's quite a large block up there. And like I say, there's shops either side, so it's not as obvious to see the entrance to that. And the same with on the other side of the road, the Talbot Hotel that stands there. The Talbot is a hunting dog, and at one time there were two wooden dogs in front of his door to establish where the main entrance to the hotel was. This was built in, I seem to have lost a bit of text off the bottom of there, but I think this was built in the 1870s as well. I do remember that it closed, not personally, but it did close in 1974, although it probably finished as a hotel a few years before that and was then sold off. Like I say, that is now just a doorway on the opposite side from the Liberal Club. So if we continue onto the corner here of Bank Street, is that we have what is now the Bank of Santander, and it is still there. This was built in 1858 for the Bradford Banking Company. And this was probably one of the earlier commissions from Andrews and Delaunay before it became Andrews and Pepper. I'm going to say a very fine building itself as well. So we've got the coat of arms of that banking company in there. I'm going to say all these banks around here, so that's why it's called Bank Street, obviously, was really the wealth that was flowing into Bradford from all those textile factories in the area and the merchants coming in to buy that type of thing. I'm going to say those first mills really expanding in the 1820s and 1830s, and here we have a knock-on effect of that in the sort of 1850s. I guess until the 1890s was the golden age of Bradford, largely because in the sort of 1870s onwards it was hit by trade regulations with America, cheaper imports and other things like that. And there's sometimes trade depressions in Britain as well. It's particularly a sort of 1889 to 1893, 1894 as well, but bouncing back during the World Wars. So we're going to come along Kirkgate now. We've come along a piece of that before, because it eventually does lead up to the church itself. And coming along there is that, like I say, this has got I think it's a charity below here, but it's charity offices. And this is the original Wool Exchange, because they built in 1828. Really, I guess, as a private members club in a way, is that where they could come and do deals in it, and I guess have a drink or so like that. But it was, I guess, it was a private club in a way, is that they could come in here, and there's a reading room in here, and also up on this first floor was an assembly hall. I say it is quite an early building, but like I say, it's sort of slightly hidden by this sort of balustrade. I guess it's been extended upwards to another floor. Maybe there's this floor has got a partition in it or something like that to create that extra space in it. Like I say, it's hard to see. That scientific club is just round the corner here, really sort of about 30 seconds up that road as well. When the new wool exchange was built, that we're going to have a look inside, this then became the post office and now has been used as offices since then. Kirkgate continues onwards and then meets Market Street further down here as well. There's a pub there called the Shoulder of Mutton that dates from 1825. So one of these sort of older buildings in the city centre. Yes, it's an Age UK. So that's the original sort of wool exchange, which is, like I say, a private members club in there. So Kirkgate goes along there. That's the bottom of Piccadilly that we've crossed halfway up. And now we're going to come down here, which is Peace Hall Yard. This very narrow street coming down here, because obviously it takes its name from when Bradford's first Peace Hall stood here. It opened in 1773 and was demolished in 1867, largely because of the opening of the wool exchange at the very bottom of the yard that we can just see just peeking down there. And it was then that was opened around there. The very ornate doorway here with a huge lantern on it, that's the entrance to the Bradford Club that was founded in 1866. They moved in here, really, I guess they were members from the older exchange and moved across here in 1877. This row of buildings that is in it was designed by Lockwood and Mawson. George invited me in there, I think it was 2016, to have a look, because he said there was a marvellous view from the roof, but it gave us a chance to have a look inside of here as well. And it could go on the first floor, most of the lounge area is, and the bar, and then you can go up to a second floor as well, up here as well. And this has got a room for 8 billiard tables up here. And I must say, the most extensive library I've ever seen just on Bradford, those books up there. From there is that we could go outside and take some sort of fire escalators right to the top of the building. And I guess those metal stairwells were put up there not as a fire escape, really probably to repair the pinnacles on top of the roof, because what you can hardly see from the ground floor because it's so steep up there. I guess it was quite scary, really, to get this view, because there's really only this sort of pinnacle holding the metal stairway well to it. This was taken, I guess, in 2016, so that wheel is no longer there. That shroud, when they were cleaning the City Hall, came off. I think that was up there for at least 2 years along there. And you can see here where we're looking across to the Media Museum across here. The Alhambra is there, and that's the Twin Towers of the Odeon Cinema across there. This was, a fine jewellery shop, because that's now redundant as empty as well. And here we are looking down really onto part of the wool exchange that we're about to go in. This is the main roof to it, and those are there's the frontage there, which has got the roundels of the explorers on it. So that's what we're generally looking across there, and obviously the City Hall there as well, designed by Lockwood and Mawson. So let's go down again and continue on Peace Yard, and we come across the Peace Museum, and put my hands up. I've not been in here. It's never seemed to have been open when I've been passing by, although they say now it's open Wednesday, Thursday and a Friday, and that's probably the issue really. And it's open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. because you'll need to check when it does reopen. It's on the second floor as well. I understand there's 60 steps up to that, and it's dedicated to peacemakers, peace movements nationally and internationally, and is linked to the Peace Studies Centre at Bradford University. So you'll see the doorway for that. So you'll have to look out for when that does reopen, which then brings us down, coming out here onto Hustler Gate, which then leads on to Market Street down here. We're looking at that building. That's another bank as well. But here we are. That's the Wool Exchange round here. That's the other bank which I mentioned before, took a photograph of. And you can say the Wool Exchange is the trading floor is now a Waterson's bookshop. I've no idea how Waterson's survives in Bradford, because it's probably one of the sort of major retailers left actually on the street, which aren't in the that new shopping centre, Bradford Broadway, down there. So let's go and have a look inside the Wool Exchange. Because they have a statue over there that is of Richard Cobden. He was born 1804, died 1865. Because the statue is by Richard Butler, unveiled in 1877. I think there's a close-up of it there. Because he was a West Riding MP and sought to have the Corn Laws abolished which were technically repealed by Prime Minister Robert Peel. The statue was actually gifted by a US citizen, George Henry Booth, who was a partner in the stuff merchants in the city, Firth, Booth and Company. And so we can see the sort of the hammer roof up there. You'll see it better on the bit of film. But there's a gallery up here, and that was people to watch the proceedings on the sales floor down there. The market took place here on a Monday and a Thursday, and it was said there was not a single type of wool or hair for which a buyer could not be found. Obviously, that was when it was in its heyday as well. The balustrade up here, that's now, I think that's another cafe. I don't think it's Costa. I think it might be Starbucks or something up there. So maybe that's how it survives. And maybe there's some sort of, being quite cheap to rent this to keep Waterstones in there. So if we look on the outside of this, because the main tower faces northwards, makes it hard to see. It's a clock tower 150 feet high. It's got two statues on the outside. This is Bishop Blaise, who I've mentioned before, who was the saint of the wool combers, because I mentioned very different hard, difficult industry to work in. Bishop Blaise would have been chosen because I think he was put to death by wool combs or something like that. That's how he came to be sort of associated with the wool and textile industries as well. The other statue here on the other side, that's King Edward III, born 1312 and died 1377. He's there because he granted Bradford a trading charter as well. And he was also quite responsible because he wanted, instead of the wool being exported into Europe to be made into finished cloth, he was really responsible for kick-starting the textile industry in Britain and to sort of bar those imports coming back in, because he quite rightly found there's that the major sort of expense of that was the profits for that were being made in Europe, and the local industry that imported that made the cloth very, very expensive. So really he kick-started that industry. So we say a lot of building going on in Bradford in these periods, especially for Lockwood and Mawson. We see that the Wool Exchange completed 1867, and they were also working near enough on the town hall at the same time. That was completed in 1873. And you've got to remember that they were also working on Saltaire and some of those other buildings as well. So it must have been a phenomenally hard work for this. I know there wasn't just the two of them, and there was they probably employed 15 or 20 people, but still all those huge projects coming through in Bradford, and it must have been a marvel to have walked around as all those were progressing. So let's have a look at that film, starting off, say, by the onto Ivegate and coming around here. So now let's move on to the next area, moving from the Wool Exchange and going round to the Cathedral. So this big block here, that's Bradford Broadway. That's that shopping centre that opened in 2015. This is where we come down from the railway station. This is where the arches are. That's the Midland Hotel round here. And this was the sort of former area where the Forster Square railway station was before it was cut back further over here. We'll see here we've got Canal Road coming down here as well. That's where the canal terminated in this area down there, because it's all been filled in, but that's where it came down into here. This, I'm going to say, was all demolished in 2006, 7 and 8 around there, and was left as a gigantic hole until it was hit by the financial crisis of 2018. But the fantastic thing about that, and I think which they should have left the city centre as they landscaped it after that, but gave this a great big huge green park in here, which actually opened up the whole of this frontage here to the cathedral standing up there, the old post office down here, and the whole of that fantastic frontage of Little Germany, which is this area here, opened up as well, right along Wells Street. That's all hemmed in, I would say, really by a service road near enough round the back. It completely hidden the post office, so you can't see that wonderful vista of it. And again, it's blocked the cathedral as well. That was once the dominant, always looked over the city centre itself. Because Bradford Beck also came down here as well. As I mentioned, that's all culverted. I think it comes somewhere like that across this image of it as well. So you can see roughly where we're going to go. So I'm setting off here at the end of the Wool Exchange buildings. That's just slightly hidden around the corner. That's where that lovely arcade was that was demolished in 1962. And it sort of left this banking building here quite forlorn on its own. This was built as the Bradford District Bank and is now, as you can see on the side, it's still a National Westminster Bank. Built 1873. This one was designed by Milnes and France, who had mentioned before, with other rival architects. So there's really sort of three of these pairings. Know a little bit more about Mr. France, Charles France, because he actually lived in Horsforth here on Outward Lane, and obviously commuted into Bradford from the railway station down at Newley along the Aire Valley line that we're about to see, that came into here in 1846. So that's what you can see there. This is a photograph taken just before Bradford Broadway was built, so you can actually see the full extent of that back. That Bradford Broadway actually creeps a little bit around here now, leaving that sort of a bit of a corner that doesn't really actually go anywhere at all. But that's the main entrance to Broadway. The foundations, as I mentioned before, were dug into 2006 to 2008, and then work stopped, leaving this huge hole in the ground. 2010, as I mentioned, is that the council took it over and laid it out as an urban park, opening those vistas to Little Germany. Construction started in earnest in 2014 and opened on the 5th of November 2015. It did then comprise for 82 shops inside of there. They're all really shops that have been elsewhere in Bradford. I think the only sort of addition they made to it, which is now no longer there, was bring a Debenhams store into Bradford. And obviously they went bust, I think, was it November or December 2020. So because that was leave one of the major anchor tenants gone in there. The ones made up of, jewellers, coffee shops, and such like. A lot of them, because they're moving from Darley Street into here, like M&S and other places like that. Because it's the same as a standard sort of shopping centre elsewhere that you get in any town or city. As you can see there, you've got your Costa, you've got your 8 Samuel shops as well down there. Extremely busy when it first opened as well. So that's what we can sort of see inside of there. You can say it's nothing special. And I think really what they did from the initial designs, it was quite an ornate, opulent place from the exterior. And really they just went for a metal frame frame with cladding on the side of that. And when you saw it going up, you think it's just like sheets of plastic going on side. So I presume it's been built as cheaply as possible and not intended to have a long shelf life. I think even when Meadowhall down in Sheffield opened, the lifespan of that, I think they gave it sort of 30 years or something. I think it opened 1990, the lifespan coming up in 2020, and that's why they started rebuilding parts of that. But that's been very successful. So I guess this only has a 30-year lifespan to get the returns on the investment, or so they hope. Who knows what those shops will remain after the COVID pandemic. So coming round the side, this is where we came down before. This is Cheapside at the part of this, leading up to Manor Row. We came here, you can see where the railway station sign is today. And this was built as a railway hotel. So this was built 1885 and designed by the Midland Railway's own architect as well. There's a plaque on the side of the entrance round here that says it's to acclaimed Victorian actor Sir Henry Irving, and he died after a performance at the nearby Theatre Royal in 1905. I'm not quite sure dying in a hotel is a major claim to fame, but there we go. It is still a hotel today. The railway station used to be further round here, so that's where those you can see the arches now, which are now a car park in there. George, I think, I've mentioned it's 3 hours free car parking in there if you can find your way round to get into there as well. I mentioned before is that the railway station was part of the Leeds, the first line out of Leeds that came down the Aire Valley and then turned into Bradford along here. So it was really a flat line, just really basically following the river down, came to Shipley and then turned left down into Bradford itself. I could say opened in 1846. It had a railway station at this end that was built in 1890 and then was subsequently demolished. It's quite often called Forster Square now, but it was actually called the Midland Station until 1924. Really, they'd need to differentiate it from the other railway station that comes in by the St George's Hall, which is now called Bradford Interchange, but we'll come round and see that a little later on. Mentioned before is that the canal came down as far as here, because it was all planned from a meeting at the Sun Inn in Bradford, where they met on the 2nd of July, 1766. It was actually chaired by John Stanhope of Low Hall in Horsforth, and because they then commissioned John Longbotham to survey the route and had an act passed for the building of it in May 1770. Because the first part of it opened was really from Leeds to, let's say, Skipton in 1777. And there's a 3.5 to 4 mile spur that comes down to Bradford. In fact, that actually was completed before that length of the canal was open. That was completed in 1774. Because it was quite an achievement as well, because although it doesn't rise or fall that much, only about 86 feet, it requires 10 locks along that very short length of canal, and cost £9,500 to build. It went £3,500 over the budget. I can say for such a small length of canal, it seemed to have a lot of problems. I can say it was blamed by Sir Titus Salt in 1849 for the cholera epidemic that hit Bradford, where over 400 people died. And I can say largely, I suspect, or he suspected, that people taking water from the canal for drinking. But that's what its major problem was, is that there wasn't enough water to supply it. I think I mentioned before, it closed and was drained in 1867. New reservoirs and water courses were built, and it reopened in 1872 to increase the flow of water through it. It closed again finally on the 25th of June 1922, largely because of its expense in maintaining it, and it was then filled in, because you can still see the line of that canal further along by the side of the Shipley Road that goes down there, where there's quite a sort of green space to the right-hand side. If you're driving towards Shipley, that's the area that it went. It technically comes out at Thackley, just before, if you're coming into Shipley, and you say it joins the main Leeds-Liverpool canal there. So coming further round here, I'm going to say it's the backside of Bradford Broadway, as you'll see on the bit of film. And like I say, there's really nothing around here at the moment. There used to be a former post office yard. That's gone now, so that's a sort of redundant area. But it brings you round to what was the post office round here, built in 1887. They complained about it at the time, that it blocked the view to the church, the cathedral behind it there, which it did. But now is that the Bradford Broadway shopping complex blocks both the view of the post office and of the cathedral behind it as well, and really can no longer be seen. This building now is called the Kala Sangam. It's an Asian performing arts centre. They put on concerts and workshops. Sanskrit in Kala means arts, and Sangam means meeting point. And could say that it was established here in 1993 and continues to this day. So I guess it's brought back into life. It's got all sorts of things behind it that you can see from the cathedral tower base as well. So I guess there's different walkways into that as well. And here we find in front of this, and at the back side of the Bradford Broadway, or one of the sort of rear entrances into it off here, is the statue of Edward Forster, because besides being MP for Bradford, he was also a woolen manufacturer and owned Greenhome Mills out at Burley in Wharfdale. He was primarily responsible for the 1870 Elementary Education Act that made all children between the ages of 5 and 13 to go to school. They still had to pay, and the education only became free in 1891 or 1892, and could say that was the thing of that. His statue originally stood in Forster Square, and then was moved into storage for 30 years, and could say with the completion of Bradford Broadway was placed out here. It was sculpted by James Harvard Thompson. He was a contemporary of Alfred Drury. He's the chap that did the statue that we'll see a lot later on Monday, which stands in between the Media Museum and the Alhambra. He did that. This statue here cost £30,000. It's solid bronze and was unveiled in 1890 by George Robinson, the first Marquis of Ripon. His statue stands at the entrance to Ripon Spa Gardens, and he was the chap that built the church out at Fountains Abbey as well, Studley Royal Church there as well, and that's where he's buried inside there as well. There's a very fine ornate tomb in there to him. That's to the first Marquis of Ripon. So that's a bit of a detour. The road comes around here, then goes up Church Bank, which goes by the side of the cathedral. But these steps were placed here when the post office was built, and these are called, obviously I've put it there, cathedral steps, built in 1888. I'm going to say it saved this sort of bit of a detour for people to come in front of the post office and go up into the cathedral itself. So we're going to go up the steps and go and have a look inside the cathedral. At the top of the steps, that's the view that you get there today, because that's the former post office building there. And that's the lovely backside of the Bradford Broadway shopping complex that you get to see, and obviously no views at all, whereas until they built that, you could look right across there as well. So when just turning around, just looking at the cathedral tower before we go in, it was built 1493 to 1508. And you can just see here, if you look at this or zoom in on it, these are all bullet holes around here from the Civil War, when we can see they hung wool sacks over the side of it. It was the parliamentarians on the inside who'd been attacked by the royalists who went to and fro the Civil War in Bradford, went parliamentarian, royalist, back to parliamentarian as well. Unusually here, but the actual clock face here is actually painted onto the brickwork around there. It was a parish church until 1919 and was called St. Peter's. And it was in that year that the Diocese of Bradford was formed, that stretched from here. This is almost its southern point. I think it stretched all the way to Sedbergh. So it's a huge parish. And in 2014, that was renamed the Diocese of West Yorkshire and the Dales. And said probably the site of where the first wooden church was probably here from probably the 9th or 10th century, originally called the Chapel in the Wood, rebuilt in stone by the de Lacys. But really what we see here is sort of 14th and 15th century today. The main entrance is on the north side, so that's where we're going round, and into that there's a plaque there to William Scoresby. And you're thinking, well, you couldn't get much further away from the sea at Whitby than coming to Bradford. There were two William Scoresby. His father, born 1760 to 1829, and what we're talking about here is his son, as it says there, Dr. William Scoresby, 1789. He was born at Cropton, so not out at Whitby, but inland from there, about, I guess, 25 miles, I guess, from there. Died 1857, 10 years after he was vicar here at Torquay. His father, was very prominent in the sort of Icelandic whaling industry as well. He invented ice drills and the crow's nest for those for spotting whales. And he went on 28 voyages. His father did, and Dr. William Scoresby, his son, went out on 9 voyages with his father as well on the board the Resolution. And in 1823, William Scoresby's wife died, and he became a minister of religion, studied at Cambridge, and later becoming, as we see here, Vicar of Bradford, 1839 to 1847. He would have known Sir Titus Salt and Samuel Cunliffe Lister and all those other types of people here as well. So that's the link between Bradford and Whitby. So quite surprising as well. So this is the nave to it. The dates from the rebuilding of the church, 1458. Thought to probably been damaged, that earlier church that was probably funded by the de Lacy family during the Scottish forays after the Battle of Bannockburn. A lot of problems coming down into this part of Yorkshire in the early 1820s. It was granted cathedral status in 1919, and there were chantry chapels in here, and these were demolished. It was extended here as well. That's why you can see it's so much lighter at the east end. This was rebuilt or built in 1954 to 1963. It was funded by Sir Edward Morph. He's the Muff of Brown Muff, but he changed his name, as we'll see. He was born 1882, died 1974. The family changed their name from Muff in 1909 to Morph, and his mother was the niece of Titus Salt. The family lived in Ilkley, and his brother Thomas was awarded the VC in 1917. He didn't die during World War I, but died in 1942. And I found a bit in the Wharfdale Observer about the change of the Muff to Morph name. And it says, in Bradford, 'tis good enough to be known as Mrs. Muff, but in Ilkley by the River Wharf, 'tis better to be known as Mrs. Morph. So that was the amusing thing about their change of name in 1909. The only other part of this is ancient, is the pinnacle over the font. The font is modern. It looks like it's probably 1920s or something like that. But that dates from the Tudor times as well. All the stained glass in here is Victorian as well, and there are some on the south wall of sort of 18th century memorials. I'm not particularly going to look at the south wall because the north wall here, or the north aisle, has got some much more interesting plaques on it as well. But coming down, you'll see on the bit of film here as well is the representations of the tower at the choir stall ends there as well, and that's the view down there. You can see there's very little, funny enough, of such an ancient church actually to see in here, because most of it's on the north wall here. This is the Civil War plaque as a memorial to that action, where you can see the woolsacks hanging down the side of the tower. I guess it's for protection for both sides, is that it would repel any bullets. But I think the royalists and later on the parliamentarians, in trying to attack the church, had a major problem, is that they either had to attack it firing downhill, or they'd have to attack it from the town centre, which meant firing up the hill to get at it. And really that was the problem, is that the cannons they had in those days weren't really powerful enough. And that's why we probably see largely bullet holes which attack these. But like I say, we weren't going to do much harm on top of that. So really, once you were in that church tower, it was really near enough good as a castle along there as well. Coming up further on the wall, which you'll see on the film, is this ancient piece here, as you can see here, next to this blocked-in door that went up to the rood screen as well. Quite often is that the rood screens are strong enough for the vicar to stand upon, and then sometimes did that over the Easter period as well, because those rood screens had to be taken down during the Reformation, when Henry VIII created the Church of England. So that's why that door is no longer in use. But here we can see some of that earlier piece of stonework from a carving, which would come from a cross that would have stood here and then has been reutilized in here as well. There's another small bit as well, slightly tucked away in a corner by the old piscina as well. That's where the priests used to wash the holy vestments in there as well. You can see just another bit of cross in there, because they found it in restorations around here as well. These are thought to date slightly later than from that earlier piece of cross. These are thought to be sort of 12th or 13th century. Next to that, which I hadn't put on film because I walked past it without forgetting about it, really, is this piece of stained glass by William Morris. This dates from 1862. This is the same period that he was designed stained glass for St Martin's on the Hill Church at Scarborough as well. That was his work going in there, 1861 to 1862. The pelican that they use here is a Christian symbol for as a caring and self-sacrificing parents. I guess if we've all got children, we might all be pelicans ourselves. And so that's really what that depicts on there as well. The other thing to look for is just as you go into the church on the right-hand side, which is more obvious on leaving it, is the World War I memorial here. Bradford had its own PALS regiment that was raised in September 1914, officially known as the 6th Battalion, Prince of Wales' own West Yorkshire Regiment, because they raised a further 2 battalions during World War I, the 18th and the 20th battalions as well. I guess if you joined one of those Bradford PALS regiments, there was a 60% chance that you would have died as part of that. 1,770 at least died in that first hour on the Somme, which I think started about 7:30 in the morning. I think Leeds and Bradford PALS were next to one another on the front line. I don't think that ever happened again, because it hit so many households in sort of local communities as well. So it depicts on around that window, it's quite dark as well, is that some of the actions that they take place in right up to 1919, when they secured Germany. It was created by Archibald J. Davis of Bromsgrove in 1921. So let's have a look at this piece of film coming, from the back of the Wool Exchange, coming round to the cathedral. route around Little Germany now. So I'm just taking a circular route round here, coming across from the cathedral onto Vicar Lane, coming straight across there. Vicar Lane actually runs downwards as well. Burnett Street runs upwards there. But I'm coming down here onto the Leeds Road, then coming up the Leeds Road a bit, and then coming up Chapel Street here. This row of buildings here was once a Quaker school. This is where Bradford Playhouse is. The very glass building, if you're coming down the Leeds Road, guest house is on this corner around here. Coming up there, that's where the home furniture, I think there's a chair and the grandfather clock on the corner there. So that's a statue there. Coming on, this is called Festival Square. This area is here, and coming back to the top of the road that looks down onto Vicar Lane all the way around there. And that's where the majority of the better buildings of Little Germany are. You can come further up here as well, and the other buildings in this area, but this gives a better view of all these sort of major buildings, especially the ones down here where Eastbrook Hall is as well, really coming down here, but we're going to have a look at those. So coming up here on Church Bank, so crossing the road, there's some steps down near the tower onto Church Bank, and coming across here as well up onto Vicar Lane, as we see that much more modern building up here. People remember that when I gave them a trip around Bradford a few years ago, probably in 2018, that we actually had lunch here in a cafe owned by some photojournalist called Guzlian, and we had quite a long lunch there, which I think lasted all of an hour and a half, but I'll pass that by because it made a difference to the day. But really, when we're coming into Little Germany here, there are sort of 55 listed buildings in a 20-acre site, and they're all really built between 1855 and 1890, although because there's an odd one which is much more modern, and there's one on Festival Square that dates from 1913. They're all laid out on a gridiron pattern by Thomas Dixon in 1856. At the top of the area, looking down onto the city centre, stood a house called Eastbrook House, and that was built by Edmund Peckover, and that's how we get some of these street names and other things named after it. He was a Quaker, he was a wool stapler as well, and was also involved in funding the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. And so there are all fields around here, and because in 1797 those fields, some of them were owned by the vicar as well, and that's why we get Vicar Lane coming here as well. And we get it it's sort of a squarish, triangular sort of area. It's formed by Old Leeds Road, that's the one we just crossed to this area, and the New Leeds Road, which was built further over here at a lesser gradient. That was built in 1824. Because various architects were employed around here, including Milnes and France and Lockwood and Mawson, because they were the major ones on here. So we're going to come and look at this small grouping just around here as well. People don't really know what these initials stand for, but there'll be probably some German one, because it was the German merchants that were coming across here. They weren't buying wool and bringing it here for sale. Is what they were over here for, was to buy finished goods. The finished goods came into these warehouses, the finished cloth, and were then exported into Europe. That was the main reason behind all these buildings here. So I guess this I could have been a J, and the H there, people don't know who it means for, but it was built, one of the earlier ones, 1860, by Eli Milnes and Charles France in there as well. I'm going to say on the opposite side, say this one with the red door here. This is say on the sort of this is on sort of the corner of Curragh Street. That's going to see there. That comes up, so that's what we're crossing. Vicar Lane goes forwards there, and they're quite notable. A lot of these buildings are for the concave sides to them. That's just a design thing of them. They weren't there for any purposes really. This was built in 1857 along here. This one over here that it backs onto, 1859. That's Lockwood and Mawson did that one as well. The one straight ahead blocking the street, I like this to sort of give you a view down, although it's all hemmed in, but it's all the same sort of type of building. That's Albion House. That was built in 1868. That was designed by Milnes and France. It wasn't just sort of wool fabrics that came in here, but they bought widely across the north as well. So you got cottons coming in here from Lancashire as well. Other things that had been stored here have been blankets, carpets, rolls of cloth. So they weren't really used for, we wouldn't have seen any really bales of wool being hoisted around here. And that's why that's why there's no tackle on this. But look at these huge entrance doors here that led into the heart of these buildings, because they sort of with gates on. You can't really see them on the film because unfortunately the day I was filming here, I think there's quite a few vans manoeuvring around here as well, which is sort of unfortunate. But I'm going to turn down this road here because where Vicar Lane turns down, but the top part of Vicar Lane, although you turn right to go down, the top part of that is called Burnett Street, because this is building here on the left hand side is called Components House. That was built in 1867, also by Milnes and France as well. So they're probably more into industrial buildings than they were into more commercial banking type buildings that we're seen in the city centre. But most of the more important buildings, we're going to turn right down this road here on the film to the bottom of Vicar Lane. This one here, which you see, is the Bradford Chamber of Commerce. That was known as De Vere House, another warehouse built in 1871 to the design of Lockwood and Mawson. The company they were building it for were called Thornton, Homan and Co. As the American and Chinese export warehouse. That's why you get this huge golden eagle over the top of the door there, representing the American trade. It's now home to the Bradford Chamber of Commerce. That was established in 1851 by German immigrant Jacob Behrens, and because they had to put pressure on the government for trade treaties and to stop restrictive import and export duties. Perhaps he was creating an EU before the time of it. So that's the De Vere House. That's a close-up, of the eagle on there. The really sort of importance of that. Sort of design features, unfortunately, but don't go on into today because they're not built to last. Most of the buildings they're building. Right across the road from it, as you see on the piece of film, is the Law Russell Warehouse. Again, this is by Lockwood and Mawson, opened in 1873. And it's great because they've got a corner site here and they've really taken advantage on that and sort of building it up in tiers above there with this sort of colonnades seemingly hold one above the other as well. And again, you see the large loading door down there, so that these goods will have been brought in and out of those as well, similar to the one higher up on Vicar Lane. So the Vicar Lane comes down here and it meets the Leeds Road, the main road from Leeds that comes into nowadays. And we've come across this building here. I think this the masons who created this is absolutely fantastic. It's so deep, to say that it's been built there 1859 to 1862, again designed by Milnes and France. So whether they stipulated this or they left it up to the masons to do it themselves, I don't know. But you can say when you got the sun on it, you can say it's quite fantastic as well. And so this is known as the reading rooms as well. And if you go further around and have a look up, really at the sort of first and second floor, is that there's two pictures here together. You can see some of the designs along here as well. So we've got a camel, with wool on its back. We've got a beehive somewhere. There we are. And that represents industry. I can say that's where Mr. Rogers has his almshouse in Harrogate. He's got the representation of the beehive on it. So perhaps he got his idea from here as well. And further along, we've got a globe there representing the sort of global industry that Bradford was reaching out to as well. I'm going to say there are got sheaves of wheat on it, and there's a bird carrying an olive branch as well, the dove of peace, I guess. But next door to it, because they seem to be conjoined, these two buildings, and like I say, we got a ram's head again representing the industry of Bradford above it. This building then joins straight onto, as you see on the film, onto Eastbrook Hall. It was originally built as a Methodist chapel in 1825. That's not what we see today. This is the rebuilt Eastbrook Hall of 1903. Unfortunately, it caught fire in 1996 and looked very likely that it was going to be demolished because of really the sheer scale of it. And even then, is that so many buildings were redundant in Bradford, but it was saved and then converted into 70 flats between 2006 and 2008. And like I say, it opens up from the main entrance into a courtyard in there. And like I say, the whole thing, when it was completed, was opened by the Prince of Wales. So this is the Leeds Road that comes down, that was opened in 1824. The old Leeds Road came down further over there, came steeply down the bank into Bradford. So this is a gradient, and you can see built a lot wider than it is today. So that's the Eastbrook Hall there. We're going to come over here and look at the side of the Bradford Playhouse. I know I showed you this a week or so ago, is at the start of the Independent Labour Party was in Bradford, and that's why we got the mural on the side of the wall of the Playhouse there, because it was formed on the 13th of January 1893, the very first so-called one in Britain. It came out of a result of a strike at Manningham Mills, when sort of the workers had come disillusioned with the Liberal Party, and that really there was no sort of paternal link between the owners, because Samuel Cunliffe Lifter at that time was living up in Massam, so he probably very rarely came down to Manningham Mills at all. And so a lot of the other mill owners had moved out of Bradford as well. And so this was formed to represent the Workers' Party, as we see there, and eventually merged with the Labour Party, which was officially formed, I think, 1900, and the Independent Labour Party went into that as well. So that's hence the mural on the side of that building there. Looking slightly up the road, this is, I don't know, it's some sandstone blocks here that weigh six tons. They were, this sort of was placed here by Terry Hamill in 1992 as a part of a sculpture trail that was placed around Little Germany and the wider area of Bradford itself. That's the building there, which got the glass front down there, called the Gatehouse. It's 11 floors of that is, built 2005 to 2007 at a cost of £22 million, 35 metres high, and houses 142 apartments in there. I think on the very ground floor there's a curry house in there as well. So the sort of Bradford Shipley Road, or sort of ring road that skirts around Bradford, goes beyond there. So it really sort of keeps Little Germany as one piece and sort of divides the rest of the road. It's a bit of a wild west up that Leeds Road, I must say. It's traffic can do whatever it likes, it seemingly. And even last Saturday when I was there, you just sit there and there's people on motorbikes doing wheelies down it without helmets down that Leeds Road. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And because I've once walked up there to have a look in some of the shops, and it's sort of quite mind blowing what there is up there. There's so many sort of places to eat as well. And there's even sort of cafes for chai and for a lot of sweet things. They eat cakes and things like that. And they're, to me, they're just pure 100% sugar. And there's other shops like Islamic Treasures and things like that. It's sort of a completely different world to let's say, Leeds city centre that you get up there. So quite an interesting road to have a wander up if you dare. So we're going to come up Chapel Street here. So this is the mural of that Independent Labour Party. It's on the side of the Bradford Playhouse there. That was originally built in 1837 as the very first temperance hall in England. But in 1935, it burnt down and was then rebuilt as a theatre. J.B. Priestley was its first president for 25 years. And like I say, his mother and sister also helped out here as well. It still remains a playhouse today, theatre, music, cinema, I guess comedy, cabaret, and other things like that in there as well. On the other side of the street that we see now, it says apartments to rent, is that this is the former Quaker school that was down here. Remember that Edmund Peckover, and could say his family probably inherited the lands around here, formed this Quaker school that was built in 1832. I can say that no longer. And it's up Chapel Street, but you see at the very top of that is that because this is called Grandad's Clock and Chair, this sculpture by Timothy Shutter, and placed here in 1818. It's placed here in 1992. I love that sculpture because the street is sort of rises up from the Leeds Road. And actually, Chapel Street does continue beyond the crossroad that this stands at, but it's, like I say, it's most amusing. And you can actually sit in that seat as well. So this turns the corner now onto Peckover Street, and this is called Festival Square, this area, because it's gone through various permutations. It's never been really successful, Little Germany, I guess post the 1960s. I don't think Bradford quite knows what to do with it. I think at one time they were going to knock it down, but there's a little Germany action group formed to make sure that none of the buildings were lost in the 1980s. So they created this sort of performance area around here in order to, I guess, have events on there to bring visitors in to see that. But it's never really taken off. And although they've spent millions of pounds renovating the buildings and have to turn a lot of them into apartments, is that when you've seen go around this area is how many to let signs are. And I estimate that really half the buildings in here today, and probably more now, are to let as well. And so it's a shame, but because this is another great warehouse behind here. This is where Behrens, the chap that founded the Chamber of Commerce, that was his warehouse that he had round here as well. And he was responsible for the formation of that. And because other warehouses here next door to that is 1902 as well. But across the road is probably a slightly more modern one, just outside of this period. This is called Biscore House. That's right, it's got here on the front of Biscore Limited, because it doesn't trade anymore today, but they kept it on the front there. This was built in a 1930s style. And you can see this is really the site of where the Independent Labour Party started as well. So the property next to it, this is called Atomic House. That was built in 1859. So I'll leave that there for today, because there's obviously